Hello, my name is Caroline Shimataro, and I am immensely excited to have the pleasure of introducing Kat Gordon, class of 2000, or as many of you probably know her as, the Muddies lady with cool hair. About 7 years ago, I sat on my bike in my driveway talking to my neighbors who were in the process of moving out of their house. My dad and I had asked them if they knew anything about the people who had bought the house, and I expected them to describe some old generic couple that we'd probably wave to every once in a while. But as soon as they began to describe the new owners, my mouth dropped. I threw my bike on the ground, sprinted into the house, and began to scream to my mom, "The Muddies lady is going to be our neighbor, Kat Gordon. She's going to be right next door." And although I've definitely calmed my obsession, a little bit at least, Kat has not disappointed as a neighbor. In fact, she's become much more than a neighbor these past years. She's been a friend and a mentor, and has also created the place where I spend way too much of my time and money. Kat opened Muddy's Bake Shop on Sanderlin in 2008. Since then, she's opened Muddy's Kitchen on Broad and the Muddy's Midtown Shop on Cooper. But Kat's passion extends much farther than cupcakes and toffee bars. She is committed to cultivating an organization that invests in both the community and individuals, pursues excellence with verve, and shares joy with others. Like most small business owners, she's worn many hats at Muddy's, from dishwasher to editor to baker, many at the same time. She's been active on the boards and committees across Memphis, including the St. John's Episcopal Church, Memphis Makers Market, the Episcopal Diocese, MIFA, and St. Mary's Alumni Board. Most recently, she's added teaching to her job description and has hosted workshops for several companies and nonprofits, sharing the Muddy's approach to customer service and visioning. Much like her cupcakes, Kat is special and delightful, and you truly can't find one like it anywhere else. So without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome the class of 2000 and Memphis' own Kat Gordon.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay. I need to preface this with something that no one who taught me when I was here in school will be at all surprised to hear. After going through probably about 5 or 6 drafts trying to figure out what I wanted to say to y'all this morning, and then tossing and turning last night after, granted, having procrastinated just a little bit, going through what exactly I wanted to narrow down, I came to the conclusion, this isn't going to work. I need to completely re-scrap the whole thing and just start all over from my procrastination talent. So I've ended up kind of deciding, instead of giving one of the many drafts that I prepared for y'all this morning, to just do a little of my very own Q&A. So I'm going to kind of play both the character of asking the question and then also answering the question. And I have sourced these from the typical questions that I get. And I do also need to preface this with, there was a lot that I wanted to say with y'all this morning. And I do need to say the opinions that are going to be presented here are just that. They are my opinions. They are not prescriptive for what I think you all need to do with your life. And any adult who ever attempts to pretend that they have it all figured out and have all the answers and are telling you what you need to be doing with your life is either lying, delusional, or trying to sell you something. Go buy some cupcakes. So the number one question that I typically get asked will probably be no surprise. What's your favorite cupcake? My favorite cupcake is actually pie, so that was quick. Why is it called Muddy's? So not everyone actually knows. Muddy's is named after my grandmother. Her real name was Jane. I called her Muddy. No, they're not all her recipes, although I definitely hear that sort of legend spread around. It's actually called Muddy's because she was the kind of person who baked and cooked for other people, and not in a really super sweet way. I imagine if I'd known her into my adulthood, we actually would have butted heads quite a bit. She was what you could fondly call a broad. Married 3 times, chain smoker, lots of martinis. But that was her way of passing on some joy, and she didn't do it in a self-righteous kind of way. I'm not even sure that she really thought about it, but when she cooked for her family, she just cooked double, and there was always food on its way out the door to take to someone in a nursing home, someone in the hospital, somebody who'd had a baby. That was her way of contributing and making a small difference. And when it came time to name the business, that's the most fun of making anything, is sharing it with other people. So now y'all know why Muddy's is what it's called. You'll think of that when you come in. You'll see her portrait, by the way. If you go to the East Memphis store, her portrait is painted. Chose not to have her painted as her grandmother's self because she was also extremely vain and would have been really horrified by that. So you'll see her hip cocked, cigarette in hand, looking like she's about to cause some trouble. I routinely get asked, not just at events like this, but literally meetings, the grocery store, anywhere that I am, if I have cupcakes with me. If I did, you wouldn't want them. So, no. How do you maintain work-life balance? I don't. And one of my favorites, have you always been passionate about baking or cake, or insert the product here? This formed the basis of one of the drafts that I was working on for y'all. And honestly, I couldn't quite get it to a point where I felt like it was polished enough to serve on its own as a speech, but it's a topic I've given a lot of thought to, and it's a question I get a lot. Have you always been passionate about cupcakes? And to me, it feels kind of like a trick question. It's like asking, do you still club baby seals? Like, well, no, and no. I'm actually not passionate about cupcakes. I'm not passionate about baking. I'm not sure what I'm super passionate about to this day. And it was a source of a lot of angst for me growing up. Some people are fortunate enough, and some of you are fortunate enough to have your thing already figured out. And some of my classmates, you heard my friend Mega Carcara speak, I think in the spring. Dang, I was so jealous of her. She knew she wanted to be a doctor forever. And the way that she addressed her hurdles and that determination that it took, and as she pointed out, the many surprises that path took to get where she wanted to go, are not to be mitigated. But when I was sitting where you are, man, was I envious that she already had her thing figured out. Through my 20s, I was surrounded by people that it felt like also had their thing figured out. You figure out later in talking with folks that they were faking it too, and like none of us really knew what we were doing. But I think that I approached a passion as something that was like, the one in a romantic comedy, or, a perfect pair of pants out there that if you just tried on enough, you were eventually going to find that pair that fit just right. The perfect career passion, the perfect relationship passion. I think I really equated that passion with my being passive, that was just something that was going to find me. And it didn't. And I kept thinking, okay, there's something wrong with me that I haven't figured this out yet. I guess I'll just kind of sit around waiting. And what I ended up discovering was that the more of myself I poured into something, that's when the love for it really grew. And it took me a really long time to figure that out. And I don't know that I have any great advice for how you can figure that out if that's something that is bothering you, except to say, you're not alone. And sometimes it just takes some of us a little bit longer to find that, and to keep trying at it and keep working at it and not expect for it to be this perfect fit, right out of the gate. A lot of people ask me, especially folks who are thinking about starting their own business, which is my usual audience, what would you do differently if starting again? And I think this is a great question. It's a question that I probably have asked a lot of people that I consider mentors, and yet I hate getting it myself. I don't know that I would. Like, if I had the whole, like, super literal time machine experience where somebody said, I can take you back and you can make a different decision, I would probably be absolutely terrified to do that for fear of, like, well, what if it changed this and this other thing, and then, like, get really technical about it. But I probably would reframe that to say, if I had any regrets, what would they be? And I think my biggest regret is that I was too self-focused and have been too self-focused for most of my life. You know, all of us are the star of our own show, and I think that's fine. That's how it's supposed to be. But kind of like the passion question, I kept framing things in terms of me. Like, okay, what's gonna make me happy? What, you know, do what you love. Like, ugh, that was terrible advice to give me, because it's like, well, I don't know. And I was thinking about, like, well, what makes me happy? I don't know, sitting around watching movies, reading books. I needed to spend a little bit more time thinking about what exhausted me in a good way, but contributed something to other people. Like, that was probably a much better meeting. If it exhausted me in a good way, it meant that I had to care. I had to put a little bit of something of myself into it. And if it did something for someone else, then that's the clue that maybe it's worthwhile and, you know, not just a piece of vanity. I probably wouldn't listen if I could go back and give myself that piece of advice, because one of my strengths and weaknesses is incredible amount of stubbornness. But I would probably try. A question from my mom: why do you keep overcommitting? You're so tired all the time. And I think it ties into those last questions. It's actually because I've probably spent about 15 years of my life undercommitting and not putting all of myself into anything. When I was sitting where you are, I was not the great student who was studying super hard. I was probably doing enough to pass. Not ever really trying that hard, because if you don't try that hard, you can't fail that badly. I'm not sure I was aware of that at the time, that that's what I was doing. But, you know, if you don't care too much about other people, you can't be that disappointed by them. And if you don't go out for the sports team or try out for the play, you're not going to be disappointed when you don't get it. And I spent a lot of time like that, just committed enough to not be super noticed. And so now I think I tend to overcommit and do what my husband calls helium hands. This is definitely like a disease that a lot of St. Mary's people have. You know, somebody says, oh, I need someone too, and before they even finish the sentence, do you find, like, Hermione Granger? Yes, I'll do it. And yeah, I think that's why I tend to say yes so much now. I'm making up for some lost time. Because now I find that I care a whole lot. And I still trip and fall, but it doesn't bother me as much, because honestly, if I think back now, if somebody asked me, hey, think of someone who fell really hard and boy, was that embarrassing. I can't really think of that many people, but I can think of a ton of people, classmates, friends now. I mean, even some of these students. You know, I'm going to totally embarrass Caroline right now. You know, she tried out for this amazing internship and was persistent. And I never would have done that. I wouldn't have even applied because I would have been so scared of that no. And I see my niece Blaze, who is the most graceful, beautiful dancer. And I've been watching her dance since she was probably 6. And she's definitely fallen down and she's made mistakes, but that's not at all what I think of. I think of how hard she's worked and how amazingly beautiful she is in these movements on the stage. And so I think about how incredibly self-involved I must have been to think that if I tried and fell down, that that's what people would remember about me. So I still struggle with this just a little bit. But I think that's okay. And I think now the overcommitting is probably just my way of making it up. That's also what's most challenging, which is another question. If I could teach one thing to everyone, what would it be? As Carolyn mentioned, part of what I've been doing lately has actually been teaching, which is funny because when you have an English major, people always ask you in college, like, oh, what are you going to do with an English major? Teach? And my response was always, oh, no, I don't have the patience for that. And now I find myself as a manager of over 50 people teaching. And then I'm finding myself in work groups. I have had sessions with FedEx and with some different nonprofits around actually teaching, which just seems crazy to me. So if I could teach you one thing, it's something that we teach at Muddy's, which is the training compact, which could also be the learning compact. And I feel like a lot of you are probably already a lot better about this than I am, and it just took me a while to learn it. But it says that when you are filling the teacher role, and spoiler alert, we all are, all the time, even if it's just teaching ourselves to each other, you have some responsibilities. Imagine. You have the responsibility to make your expectations clear. Nobody's a mind reader. So you have to make your expectations clear and say what it is that you want of the other person. You have to give them some resources to do it. Again, don't just leave them there floundering. And then you need to recognize and reward their progress, no matter how imperfect. You want to give people feedback on, hey, great, yeah, that's going well. That's exactly what I had in mind. Or, no, not quite, try this other thing. It's something your teachers are already doing every day and are really doing it well. But then as the learner, you also have an agreement to this and a really important role. And that's to show up and take responsibility for it. Someone can invest a lot of themselves in teaching themselves to you, teaching a subject to you, and you'll do the same for other people. But if the person in the learning role isn't showing up physically, mentally, if they're not taking some responsibility for that, then nothing really happens with it. Nothing dynamic happens. But when it does, some really special things start to happen. You really get progress and momentum and some friction in a good way, and you start to move forward. And that's probably been the foundational thing that we've been able to use at my business in moving forward. And Caroline and I talked a lot in her real world day about the difference between how Muddy's started just as a bakery, selling and making cupcakes, pies, cookies, employing people, to growing into this thing that has volunteer outreach and tons of workshops for staff and all of these things. And I really can tie it back to that training compact. We're all there learning, we're all there teaching, and because of that, we're getting better. And we're still falling down some. There are flavors that don't work out. There are some things that were personal favorites of mine that haven't worked out and are not on the menu, and that's okay. I don't regret having tried that. I'm no longer embarrassed by the fact that, hey, this was kind of a dud, and that's okay. But that's how we've gotten some momentum. That's how we've moved forward. That's how we keep getting better. And the other part of that is the commitment. I went all in for the first time in my life when I agreed to this business. And I still remember having out loud, like a crazy person, conversations with God in my car about starting the business, because I didn't want to put myself out there. And there was nothing that said that this would work. In fact, it probably shouldn't have worked. I'd read a lot of English literature and looked at a lot of paintings, but no business skills, no culinary skills. But what I did end up having was the willingness to say, all right, that's it. I can't keep half-assing it. I've got to do something, and if I fail, I'm going to fail really big, and everyone's going to see it. But I don't think it'll kill me. And I think that spirit is what's kept us going and kept me going. And I found that the harder I work at it, and I work really, really hard at it, the more in love with it I've become, and the more passionate about it I've become. And it's been like that in every personal relationship I've had, and everything I've tried to learn. The more of myself I give, the more I serve the work, the more I love it, and the more it loves me in return. So I hope that there's something in there that's helpful. If not, you got to have a 15-minute break from class. But just think on that, and think about where you are, and think about if there's something that maybe you want to try doing that you're just a little bit scared of what everybody's going to think, or that anyone's going to think. And just pray about it. And ask yourself, okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? What would happen if I took full responsibility for my experience and just stepped up and said, if it works, it works, and if not, we try something else. Thank y'all so much for having me this morning.